Ministry and children. Anytime you combine the two, you have the potential of great blessings and you have the potential of toxicity to damage those ones that you love the most. Today on Ministry Matters, we're going to talk to you about children, their involvement in the ministry, and how the ministry has the ability to affect them. God bless you. Thank you today for listening to the Ministry Matters podcast as we discuss children and how our ministry affects them. Hello, everybody. This is Bishop Douglas White, and you're listening to the Ministry Matters podcast. This is a space designed for callings to be clarified, character to be cultivated, commitments to be deepened. God bless you. Let's talk about matters that pertain to your ministry. Of all the things that your ministry pertains to, surely there's none more important than your own children. We're going to discuss some of that today. I want to welcome everybody to listen to this Ministry Matters podcast. I'm Bishop Douglas White, and I'm thankful that you're here with us today. I'd like today to let everybody know that this is going to be a first on the Ministry Matters podcast and a first worldwide, because today I have a very special guest that is a very unlikely guest because I know her nature. Today, my special guest is my wife. I have the greatest wife in the world, and she is my special guest today, and she's going to be able to talk about the subject at hand a whole lot better than I am. God bless you. I want to welcome my wife today.
Good afternoon. It is good to be with you. And yes, this is not my expertise. This is my husband's, but I told him that I would join in with him today and talk about this because it is a special thing to me.
I absolutely appreciate her being willing to come on the broadcast with us. There are so many things that she can speak to that I don't have the ability to speak to. We're going to delve into a specific group of individuals, a very important faction of our churches, and we're going to focus specifically on perspectives that pertain to preachers' kids. Now, mind you, in most cases, they aren't much different than anybody else, any other faction of our church. Some do spectacularly, while others fight constant battles. Some thrive under the pressure, while others buckle under the pressure. Some are greatly used of God, while others run from the God that we serve the first chance they get. On the other hand, there's a lot of things that preachers' kids deal with that most every other young person in the church has absolutely no perspective of. We're going to deal with some of those things today that preachers' kids are exposed to in a few minutes, but suffice it to say that nobody would have more knowledge of something like that than somebody who is an actual preacher's kid. Now, in that I'm what they call a first-generation Pentecostal, I was raised far, far away from anything resembling a preacher's home. My wife, on the other hand, is a pastor's daughter, and not only that, but there were 5 sisters in her family. Weren't any sons born to her mother and father, and all of them married preachers except one that married a pastor's son. Now, that's not to say that I don't have any perspectives at all of what to offer, any opinions about pastors' kids' lives, because I've raised 3 who are all in full-time ministry today. Even so, during my own formidable years, I was a heathen at best. On the other hand, my beautiful wife was raised from the time she was, you said it was 6 years old?
Yes, sir.
From the time she was 6 years old in a pastor's home, and she had a front row seat to things like building home missions churches and watching revival take off and encountering people that attacked the church and living in the shadow of unrealistic expectations and making sure that evangelists and their families were taken care of. There's a lot of things there that she seen that I never saw coming up. So trust me, I've seen preachers' kids damage their parents' ministries, and I've also seen some of the things that preachers' kids had to endure damage the preacher's kid almost beyond repair at times. And I think that's an absolute shame, but it is unfortunately a reality in some cases. I want to start today by discussing something that should be premier in our consideration about a preacher's kid. First of all, I'm going to ask my wife's involvement here. I want you to tell me a few ways that you were blessed by being a preacher's kid. While I'm sure that there are challenges, there had to be some benefits that came with being raised as a preacher's kid. I know from my perspective the struggles that I endured, the sins that I was exposed to, the obstacles that I had to overcome because my heritage had placed them firmly in my hands. But as surely as there were battles that I had to fight because I wasn't raised around the church, there surely had to be some benefits that came with being raised as a preacher's kid. So the first thing we're going to talk about today is the blessings of being a preacher's kid. And to all you ministers, pastors, evangelists, lay ministers, doesn't matter who you are, if you're going to be used of God and you've got children, you need to make specific note of some of these things because uh, there are some blessings of being a preacher's kid. So, baby, tell us a few of the blessings that came as a result of being a preacher's kid.
Well, first of all, let me say that long before we ever went out from the local church, before I was a pastor's kid, we were involved in ministry at our home church in every level. They were involved in music, they were involved in ladies, they were involved in the school. Uh, we came into the church there at Calvary Tabernacle in Indianapolis under Brother N.A. Urshan, and we were involved. And I can remember as a little girl sitting on the pew after service on Sunday nights while they'd done the Harvest Time broadcast, and that was back before pre-recording. And so everything was live, but we were involved in everything. And our life revolved around the church, not the church around our life. And it went from there then to multiple different doors of ministry that opened to our family. And so being involved and having the church a part of your life, your life a part of the church's life, that's the way it goes. But as far as the benefits of being a pastor's kid, I would start with I got firsthand training in various factions of ministry. I learned how to teach Sunday school at like 12 years old. I learned to sing in church. I learned to lead song service. I learned how to work for God. The condition of the second church that my dad took, we would leave Indianapolis as soon as he got off work on a Friday. We came back on Sunday night. We worked all weekend to get this building presentable to even bring people into it. So I learned about fundraising as a pastor's kid. You know, we was in Scottsburg, we was there, we done things and we tried to help raise funds. We did outreach. There was nobody else there but us. 4 people voted us into that church. And so when we got there, it was us, boots on the ground. But it was so rewarding to see people show up after we had invited them. You know, once we were there, I was the only Pentecostal kid in my school, period. My sisters was at other schools. I was the only Pentecostal. So there were times that they looked at me very strange and wanted to know what planet did I come from. But I was the only one in the entire school. But it was rewarding on every level to see that what our family received as a burden and to watch that burden to come to fruition. And another benefit of being a pastor's kid is that I got to rub shoulders with ministers in our entire movement as well as their families. We got to sit and listen to people talk, to missionaries talk, to officials talk. And even today, our own children that we have had and raised, we had been around some of the best of the best that has sat at our table, and our children have heard talk about ministry and had effects on our kids, influenced them. Men of God, women of God that were my heroes that they have got to be with. Sister Bobby Wendell was one of mine as a child. I remember her as a 6-year-old little girl, watching her come in, and then for her to be able to come into our home and be there. And our daughter Bethany, she was our hero, and the influence that these people have had on our kids, because now that they have their own children, they are passing it on, and I'm thankful for that. Another benefit is that it made me very aware that we were honored. This was a privilege. It was not a burden. It was not a stigma. It was a privilege, and we were honored to be a part of the ministry, because the things that God did in our world taught us how to work for God without a drudgery. It was never a drudgery. It was being used of God was a high privilege to us. And our parents made us feel that way.
Absolutely.
And one final benefit that I think I learned as a child at a very young age was things that are now has helped us build our own great church for 38 years here in Silsbee, Texas. Some of the understanding of what it is to expect in ministry was the product of what I learned as a child and seeing my own family up to their necks in the work of God. And our children, we didn't do it. He don't do it by himself. We did it as a family. If he went to preach camp, we went to preach camp. If we was at the church working at midnight, we all were at the church working till midnight. We done it as a family, and it was never a drudgery.
I think it's interesting when you was talking about it. Our kids never, we never allowed this to be a drudgery. How old were you when you said you heard Bobby Wendell at Calvary?
I was like 6 or 7.
I think it's interesting. 6, 7 years old, Bobby Wendell became a hero to my wife. And while she was your hero all these years later, when we came here to pastor the church, we again became acquainted with Sister Wendell. She invited me to come preach the national conference in Ethiopia. And because it had been your burden, we ended up taking you as well. And it was an amazing thing how in time we watched, instead of just being like you, one of your heroes, she got very, very close to our daughter Bethany. And to the point that even when my daughter was considering marrying David Jennings, she would ask Sister Wendell what she thought. And trust me, if you ever knew Sister Wendell, if you didn't want to know what she thought, don't ask her, because if you ask her, she's going to tell you. And she did. And today, now that we've lost Sister Wendell to the place she preached about all these years, my daughter and her husband are doing fantastic. We've got pictures. I marvel. To me, they're precious to be able to look at the pictures of our kids with some of the greatest people that Pentecost has ever put before us. So it is a privilege. And then I got tickled when you talked about what you went through. One of the benefits is that it taught you how to pastor a church, what was expected of a minister's wife, a pastor's wife. Again, for those of you that don't know, my own family was so dysfunctional that after I married my wife, things would happen long before we were in ministry. Things would happen, and my wife would just look at me and grin, and she'd say, "Honey, that's not how a family acts." Well, I didn't know, because that's the only way I had ever seen families act. Well, that same thing is transposed into our churches. And obviously, even from what you're stating today, there are some benefits to being a preacher's kid, but there's also some challenges that accompany being put in that position. And ironically, there's not a lot of preacher's kids. I don't know that I've ever met a preacher's kid that asked to be put in that position. But because of the calling of the parent, they have to go along for the ride. And sadly, sometimes that can be a very uncomfortable ride. I know certain things here in Silsbee. There were challenges when I first came here 38 years ago. We had a few people that tried to press the limits when it came to our kids. But thankfully, this church knew uh, knew better than to really attack our kids. And I'm very, very thankful for that because now one of those kids is pastoring this church. You, as a preacher's kid, you've seen the entire spectrum. You had friends, preachers' kids, that lost out with God, made a shamble of their lives. Why don't you tell us some of the challenges right now of being a preacher's kid?
Well, you live in a glass house and everybody watches you, and it's not a comfortable place to be. One thing I can say from my mom, she always tried to make our life normal and our childhood normal. She tried to be that go between lots of times. Bless her heart, she lived in the middle, and that's a hard place to live. But she tried to keep normalcy in our world. And I have tried to do that with our children. And everybody watches you, and everybody's waiting on you to make the mistake, waiting on you to be the one that messes up because it makes it easier for theirs to mess up. But a glass house is a hard place to live. It's the fishbowl.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I've seen it with our own kids. I've seen people try to say things and do things that it's okay for their kid, but it's not okay for your kid because they have to live to a higher standard. Well, they're still a kid. It doesn't make any difference. And sadly, you're expected to live up to somebody else's expectations. And regardless of who you are, it's impossible. I hate to say, it's impossible to please everybody.
Yeah.
And the next challenge is that just because you're a preacher's kid, some folks are quick to criticize you for just being a human being, while their own kids are doing such things much worse than what you have done or what your kids have done. And I think sometimes that's because they know their kids are falling short spiritually. Somewhere along the line, their kid's not getting it, whether it's because of them as a parent or it's because of them as the kid. But they want to point attention to you to keep the attention away from their own children.
You know, you mentioned something a minute ago that they expect your kid to be the example. One of the things that I've noticed through the years, not, not really so much with ours, but with a lot of other pastors' kids, I've noticed it that uh, sometimes they want them to be the example in arenas that there's no need. That they expect more out of them than they do out of yours as a preacher's kid. I remember we're one of those churches that are still very strong. We don't have a lot of problems with dating outside the church. We're very open about how we feel on those things. We have guidelines when they do start dating. We've got curfews that until you're married, you're not to break that curfew. And while some people think it's crazy, I've got a great church that'll testify that it's saved us from a lot of problems. But I remember one trip that our young people went on. We don't allow them to hold hands till they're a certain age. We're just very involved. We don't want them to make dumb mistakes, and sometimes they make mistakes because they feel like nobody cares. Well, we had laid the ground rules before they ever went on this trip, and when they got back, one of the chaperones jumped out of the vehicle and come rushing towards me and wanted me to get on my son. I asked him how the trip went, and they said, "You need to get on your son right now." Well, he's 17 years old, maybe. And I said, "Why would I get on him? Did he do something wrong?" I'm well aware that my kids are not beyond making silly mistakes. And she said, "No, we caught him holding his girlfriend at the time's hand." I said, "What do you mean you caught him holding her hand?" This is the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. And she said, "Well, we turned the lights on and him and his girlfriend were holding hands." What she didn't know is he had asked me before he ever left if it was wrong to hold her hand. Well, he was of the age that we didn't think there was a problem. And I said, don't you remember me laying the ground rules before they ever went on this trip? She said, I remember what you said, but your son needs to be held to a higher standard. I just don't believe that. I believe that a preacher's kids needs to be held to the exact same standard. I don't think it should be allowed for a preacher's kid. I think that some of them call it the grandfather clause, that it's a sin until it's your grandbaby. I don't agree with that. I think there are things that should never be altered. But on the same token, I don't think that a preacher's kid should have to live with people expecting more out of them than they do any other young person. But I thought of that while you were talking. And